All right, you're live.
Okay. Meeting is called to order at 7:03. Nikki, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm going to hold my computer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And Connie, could you do a roll call, please?
Brianna Mayo,
Here.
Don Adams,
Here.
Vern Carlson, Ryan Jusak,
Here.
Nikki Demers,
Here.
Trista Davis,
Here.
Jenna Ham,
Here.
Kristen Randall,
Here.
Michelle Nelson,
Here.
James Tench.
Here. Quorum is present. Ryan, could you lead us in 2A, the adoption of the agenda, please?
Okay. I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Any amendment to the agenda or questions?
Do I turn the light off? I guess no, you didn't. One of our pieces of correspondence doesn't relate to the agenda. We're just to take that at this time as it is, or is there an intent to expand the agenda?
No, we should have placed that under public comments on non-agenda items.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Oh, sorry. Good question, though. Any other question? Is there any objection to the adoption of the agenda? By unanimous consent, then the agenda is set for the evening. Dan, could you lead us through the board greeting and reading, please?
So it hasn't been very long since we've all been together, but nonetheless, coming together as a group is always good to take that time to formally kind of come together as this group. So again, for our greeting, we'll have a brave soul start, say hello to the group, be welcomed to tonight's meeting by the group by name, and then share something positive that's going on, professional life, family life, whatever aspect it is, just something positive that's happening in your world. And so looking for the brave volunteer to go first, and then who'd also identify by name the next person. I see Dawn being the bravest at the moment.
Good evening, board.
Good evening, Dawn.
Good evening, Don.
I am thankful for the snow and being able to ski in the sunshine today. And I'm passing this to Jenna.
Good evening, board.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, Jenna.
You mean Jenna?
Jenna.
You stole mine, Don. I skied at noontime today, but I in the sunshine and the sparkly snow. It was fabulous, but I was indoors all afternoon. Busy afternoon, but I'm grateful I'll leave it at that. Good evening, Ryan.
Good evening, board.
Good evening, Ryan.
I am thankful for kids that turn out to be better than you think when you talk to their teachers. So I'm glad I got some good reviews today and that we are doing our jobs, even though it's crazy. So on that note, I think I'll go to Trista.
Good evening, board.
Evening, Trista.
Hey, Krista.
I'm kind of going to say the same thing as Ryan about the parent-teacher conferences. I appreciated being able to Zoom in and have that conference with the teacher tonight. And I am so happy at how much my child loves his teacher, and the same for my daughter. They think the world of them, and I appreciate that we get to have them in our district. So with that, good evening, Michelle.
Good evening, board.
Good
Evening,
evening.
Michelle.
Michelle,
Michelle. I, for one, am very thankful for great parent-teacher conferences that I just ended like 2 seconds before the meeting. It is great, the technology that we were able to meet. And then I'm also thankful that today is my Friday. Yay! I will pass it on to Miss Kristen.
Good evening, board.
Evening, Kristen.
evening, Kristen.
Well, I feel like everybody stole what I was grateful for, but I'm not sure where in the last 15 years Zoom parent-teacher conferences were never a thing. I was so grateful to actually be able to attend them all and not feel like I was having to either take off work or run from one to the other, and was just such a pleasant experience with those teachers, and grateful for an employer who graciously allows me to participate in those opportunities with my schools during my workday. So, Brianna.
All right. Good evening, board.
Good
Evening,
evening.
Brianna.
I am like more excited than words could ever express to be back in the gym with our team. Like it's like the best feeling ever, and I feel so relieved. And yeah, I'm just really happy that we were able to make that work, and I'm thankful that all of you guys helped us make that work. And it's really been really, really great to see everybody so happy and smiley and feeling like we're getting a little bit back to life. So, Nikki.
Good evening, board.
Evening, Nikki.
Evening, Nikki.
I too am thankful for good parent-teacher conferences today. Being able to make them all on time was actually a first-time thing happening for me, and I'm thankful for teachers that really tell me what they think, whether it's good or that how we can work with our kids better to help them in class, what we can do at home to reinforce learning. So I really appreciate their candidness and their willingness to also pull out the positives of their experiences with my kids. So I appreciate that. James.
Good evening, board.
Good evening, James.
James.
Hey, James.
I am thankful for 2 grown children and not having parent-teacher conferences tonight. Yeah, I enjoyed them in all seasons, but it's fun as adults too. And I'm thankful for my son Riley, who has gone back to work. So, and a daughter still thriving in college. Dawn, have you gone yet? I'll pick you then.
No, that was a yes.
Oh, it was. I'm sorry. I'm losing my
That's
mind.
okay. I was
Who am
first.
I missing? That's right.
Dan?
Dan. Okay.
Connie?
Oh, no,
Go
boss.
ahead.
Well, good evening, board.
Evening, Dan.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dan.
So a positive for me was in the little period of time when we started coming into this Zoom meeting and before the meeting started, just hearing like the pleasant, casual conversation among the board members that were present. There were 4 or 5 of you, and there was like, it's one of those things like the healthy chat and the catching up of one's lives. And I've been thinking that again by meeting via Zoom, we don't have those kind of down times that we do at a regular board meeting. We're not in a vehicle together, just hey, what's going on, what's happening. We don't have that time as we're waiting for the last couple people to arrive, what's going on. We don't have that time to kind of just talk and again catch up with somebody else during the break or again as we're doing that cleanup. And it was just really pleasant to see that. And I think because I think one of the things that is so difficult at this time is that part of our relationships. with people that maybe we aren't in that kind of tighter social bubble, but we still have those connections to. As we come together in venues like this, we don't have that time for the more passive aspect of maintaining that friendship. And Connie.
Good evening, board.
Evening,
evening,
Connie.
You know, just the simple things in life. I had a walk at lunch today, and it was just a bright, sunshiny, sparkly day, and nice temperatures, and snow in the trees, and the sun on the mountains. It was just a beautiful, pleasant place to be. It was a nice break.
For our reading tonight, again, Justin, can you empower me to share a screen, please?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
You should be good.
Again, another set from our belief statements. I was wondering if there'd be a brave volunteer that'd be willing to read through that twice while the rest of us read through silently, and then we'll share any thoughts or reflections popcorn style on that. Looking for a volunteer. It's hard to see everybody. I see Jenna.
I'm glad to do it. We believe that each school in the district is unique. We believe that we can nurture individual interests and passions of students. We believe that people's learning needs are diverse, and it's our responsibility to meet those needs. We believe that in a nurturing environment, everyone can feel safe to take risks. We believe that it is necessary to push each student to their highest potential. And we believe that face-to-face communication builds relationships. We believe that each school in the district is unique. We believe that we can nurture individual interests and passions of students. We believe that people's learning needs are diverse, and it's our responsibility to meet those needs. We believe that in a nurturing environment, everyone can feel safe to take risks. We believe that it is necessary to push each student to their highest potential. We believe that face-to-face communication builds relationships.
And so again, just an opportunity to share any thoughts or reflections that those statements might have risen in you. Michelle?
The third one really spoke to me because with our request to share our hopes for students to Ms. Martin, that is one that I really emphasized on, was just making sure that everyone's different, and that the way we can teach to that individual student to make sure that they're successful is super important. And that, there's actually several that spoke to me, but that one, and then the fifth one, push the student to their highest potential. This is just, I feel with my boys that they're always, challenged, and, you can do it. So it's important for them to know that.
Thank you. John?
Going back to our board greetings and the parent-teacher conferences today, and it made me realize how I missed the opportunity to go into the school and see the teachers and have those, short questions answered and get that quick feedback if you need it, and just say the hi, hello, how are you doing? It was really nice to see the teachers today. And that was what jumped out at me.
Jay?
For me, Dan, it was the face-to-face communications, building relationships. I think that's a big part of what we're talking about, even in these challenging times, and how to find that balance.
For me, Dan, it kind of brought back to the front of my mind, all kids are different. Some kids it's sports, some kids it's music, some kids it's math, and we have to serve all of them. And we have to remember that in all of our decisions, and they're heavy decisions right now. And it's good that we have the group we have to discuss this and the framework and our past work to use going forward. So I'm very thankful that we have all this to work with now.
I was thinking about, we believe it's necessary to push each student to their highest potential. And again, that choice of verb push, and the idea to me that implies making sure people are outside of that comfort zone, that they're not just doing the easy thing, but have that challenge. And I think hand in hand with that challenge is that it implies and true growth comes from the need to not succeed sometimes, but to be supported and learn from that. And you get that by pushing yourself, by being pushed, encouraged by others to try something that maybe you didn't feel you were ready for, and sometimes you're not going to be. And recovering from that with support is how we learn and we grow stronger.
Thanks, Dan. Anyone else? All right, then I think we'll move on to public comment, agenda item 4A. Do we have anyone signed up?
We did not have anyone to sign up. We did have one correspondent specific to the agenda tonight.
I saw that. Everyone have a chance to read that? Okay. Well, we will move straight on to old business then. Agenda item 5A. Jenna, could you lead us in this item, please? 5A.
Yes. I move to amend the Denali Rural School District Smart Start Framework, which was approved by the board on October 15th, 2020, as presented.
Second.
Thank you. And just kind of as a reminder to everybody, I'm going to ask for a little bit more formality this evening than we usually have. I'd like questions or comments to be proxied through the chair, me, just to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be recognized, as well as let's make sure everybody has a chance to speak to an item first before we have a second go around from a particular speaker, just so that we don't tend to monopolize the conversation to one side. And with that, questions or comments? Yes, Dan.
Well, I was asked by a board member some questions, and President Tension, I thought that it'd be good to provide those answers to the full board to help give kind of some context to some of the things, so that all the board members have that same information. So if it's okay, I could put that out so that you'd have that for your kind of collective discussion.
I think that's an excellent start.
Okay. The first question was just to say, can you help us help the board understand kind of that process that you working with the Health Level Advisory Committee use to review things and come to a decision. Okay, so this long next bit is answering that. So for the process, the structure for that committee, the Health Level Advisory Committee, we put together after the first approval of the framework by the board in mid-July, and then presented and shared with the board on July 30th. We shared the membership of the board, shared the membership with the board, and also shared kind of the overarching structure that the committee and those individuals would look at the information and case information, use the framework provided by the board, and then provide the superintendent with a recommendation. The superintendent was vested to then make the final determination. Okay, and to be the one that says, okay, we've had this discussion, had thought partners, heard different ideas, but now to come to this decision rests with a single person. Okay, rather than being in a situation with like a split vote, to just say, focus the responsibility, the animosity, the whatever it is onto one focus point. Right. And then with the final decision, we also shared that we'd then communicate that out with the site administrators so that people are getting that information from the administrator that they're kind of used to hearing from. You're more used to hearing from, Jenny Mason or Nathan Pitt or Eric Filardi, even though they've been letters that I've written, they are forwarding those out. And then they might have further kind of detailed information to then share for each site. In terms of, we also shared kind of the timings of when we would meet. We said every week we'll meet once a week, kind of regardless of what's happening, just to kind of take a look, take a pulse of the community and the state and go, all right, what's going on? Like, even if we are completely solidly at a low risk and there were no locally reported cases and everything's calm anywhere else, it's still just like, hey, let's get together, let's meet and kind of take a look at things. Also, we said, if a case or cases comes up locally, we'll try to convene quickly so we can look at that information to see if we need to make a decision that raises our risk level, or we have enough information that lets us stay at that lower risk level. Right. In terms of timing, we were able to identify at that time and say, we anticipate that moving up in risk level would probably happen quickly. That cases would probably happen fairly quickly, especially in a small community. A very small number of cases has a significantly larger impact than a small number of cases in a big community. And so our risk level would, in a sense, go up more quickly. We said it'd probably go down fairly slowly. And at that point, we were saying probably like a 14-day, like a 2-week period of time to come back down in risk levels. And we looked at that 14-day window because that's like our 14-day incubation period as recommended through CDC, DHSS, that if there was transmission in the borough, any exposure prior to that, again, is recommended a quarantine for 14 days. The idea that people will develop symptoms, be confirmed positive within that time, or if they're asymptomatic, would simply recover on their own without demonstrating symptoms, and therefore be kind of post-COVID contagion risk-free after the 14 days. And so a 14-day window gives time to say, okay, those cases kind of no longer pose a risk of transmission. And so those cases would fall out of that 14-day window. And we'll talk it's interesting because we've also learned some stuff that I'll talk about later through our work. The committee, as we meet, I'll talk through a little bit of like, what's our process. So we come together, and if we've had like a press release from the borough or a concrete piece of information like that, we'll try to email that out to the committee members prior to the meeting and say, hey, at 3 o'clock, we're going to discuss this. So they kind of have that information if we're able to provide it prior to the meeting. When we come together, the first thing we do is I'll walk the group through the information from the DHSS dashboard, where we start looking at what are the 14-day case rates kind of across the state, just giving us that kind of broad picture, what's happening in the Fairbanks community, the Anchorage community. Might look locally, but again, kind of that statistical size makes looking at the information either for Denali Borough or other interior challenging or even irrelevant to quite look at to make that specific determination for us. Again, look at the DHSS overall risk levels, not just that 14-day rate. Look at different aspects of the statewide health system capacity, testing positivity rates, both locally and in other communities, and then also that test return date. Kind of like those are all factors that lead into what's happening broadly and how crisp of a picture is it that we have. Yeah. We then start looking at and say, okay, well, what's our specific local information that we have in terms of what do we know about new or recent cases that have been reported locally, either to visitors or to in-borough residents. And so most generally, Nurse Keith will share that. And again, working with public health, she has that information. She has that information also working with the health team within the borough. That's a connection of the various providers, not just the 2 nurses that work for the borough's program, but also our 3 other clinics. And so has a lot of kind of information about local cases quickly, provided the testing was done locally. We'll usually then get an update from the Borough Incident Command Team, Chris Knoll, who's a member of the committee. Clay Walker sat in for Chris while Chris was out at a fire response in California as part of a team down there. And again, there we're usually getting information kind of on robustness of local testing, kind of confirmation availability of supplies, that type of information from kind of their kind of borough command aspect as they kind of look at and monitor the situation. We'll then take some time and say, okay, are there other things that people like have direct knowledge of? Like, let's not try to do too much. Well, somebody told me that somebody told me that somebody told me that somebody told me that someone over there might be positive, but my friend told me. That type of trying to get like that information kind of as direct as possible that's in the public domain. Because there are times when Nurse Keith might have information that's confidential, and so she's not going to report that even to our group. But we might go, so she might say something like, well, it was one of the large employers that had a case test positive. And 5 of us might go, oh, it was a school district. I know, somebody told me. Where that information is through another means in the public domain, but not out through the health channels. Okay. And even to the point sometimes of individuals, there are times when there are members of the committee that might know through direct contact or through supposed strongly considered indirect things of who a specific individual might be. Carrie's really not going to state that or confirm that. That's not her role. But again, it's like somebody was on Facebook and I saw that they said they are positive. Or times when Carrie is able to be more direct, it's I was contacted by the positive individuals. I have information and they have said who they are to us. So we have very concrete, specific information that then she's able to share a bit more broadly with us. We then take time and just have a general discussion kind of like that. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? Are there other aspects that maybe we've seen or that we've got concerns about? And kind of putting all that out on the table for everybody so that we all have that same information. One concept behind that is you create a shared pool of meaning. Like regardless of what decisions come out of it, like we kind of understand we're making the decisions from the same spot. Okay, and that helps understand when we do have divergent views. And then we go around one at a time, and I try to randomize a bit of who I pick to go first, and we just kind of go through, and I'd say like, okay, Dawn, what level do you think we're at? And you'd say, and I go, James, what level do you think we're at? Jenna, and just through everybody. I've listened to that conversation, I've listened to those recommendations, and then at the end of that, I'll say, okay, I affirm that we are at high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And that's our basic process. Then after that, sometimes we have some communications like, okay, we know the borough, because through Chris, is going to send out a press release soon. And so we'll say, okay, this is in a sense embargoed information for a while, so that, you know, we're trying to send a coherent message, and have so far been able to kind of make sure that we have that tight communication with the borough, so that it is a release of information publicly, and then we quickly are able to then kind of demonstrate a response to that, where the response has already been considered and decided often before that is published or goes out. And so after the meeting, we'll kind of hold that information a bit more personally or privately. I'll take time, try to compose that letter, and then have that reviewed generally by either Jenny Mason or Nurse Keith for kind of general editing, sometimes specifically with Nurse Keith if I'm starting kind of on the edge of maybe sharing information that I might have that I shouldn't share in public domain, and she helps kind of correct that if needed. And then we message that out and then kind of roll through with any kind of more kind of administrative aspects with it. Some of the things that we've kind of learned through doing this is that the language on community transmission, community has a tight definition with DHSS, and it takes DHSS, what I've seen for Denali Borough cases, about 2 weeks to identify the type of transmission. So that's been challenging, where a few weeks ago we had started hearing presumed community transmission. It was still a long time before it was confirmed community transmission. I think when I checked this morning at 10 a.m., the most recent case with a specific definition was had a recorded onset date of 10/12. And then the next 4 cases, one on the 15th, 16th, and 19th, as listed on the DHSS site, were still under investigation. So no determination whether it was travel related, a secondary, or community. And I looked at then the state as a whole, and I'd say like 80 or 90% of the cases as a state are still under investigation, even things from like June, where at some point it's under investigation is probably a bit more of we don't know and we'll never know. So we've learned that's a real challenging description to use. Well, at the beginning, it seemed great because we were able to say, wait a minute, those people got off a plane, got an RV, drove down here and are quarantining. Really wish they would have gone to Delta to do that. But we're very certain that that is not community transmission. And even though we had those positive cases long ago in the borough, it was like we could kind of see that's not going to be community transmission. We don't have to change. We can stay in our low risk. We had a resident who had recently come to the borough, who I think we also through direct information was very, very much quarantining, tested positive, continued the quarantine. We were able to say, well, since you just kind of moved here, you probably didn't catch it here, and you've been quarantining. So the risk of you're getting it through community transmission or contributing to any ongoing community transmission is really low. So we're going to stay at low risk. Some of the things that I think we've all seen and feel and we've noticed, it can be hard to separate kind of like our personal feeling about what our risk level is and then our interpretation and application of the framework from the school district. And so there are a lot of times we'll pull up the framework, and before we go and do our round of where are we at, make sure everybody looks at that and reads that and says, okay, this is what we've been asked to do, not what is my comfort level, what is my personal thought of risk, but what is my interpretation of the conditions for the school district using the framework. And there have been times where individuals have said, personally, I think we're at high, but through that we're at medium, or you know, different things. They look at that and have used that to ground themselves in that, even when they're like, yeah, but maybe I'm going to go and my family's going to hunker down for a while. Or, okay, I see that we're at high, but I'm still throwing a party this weekend, whatever it is. We recognize, I think, and people have worked to struggle between that, what's that personal feeling, and then working to give the recommendation based on the guidance provided. We've learned it's challenging to have the information that we'd like about cases when we learn about cases. That oftentimes we learn more information about cases several days after the case. And if we think of the example when we spent a week in Medium, we didn't stay there for 2 weeks because during that week we learned information. One, we had confirmation that those visitors, again, had been in, by the time it got reported to us, they'd left the borough quite a long time ago. It was still within the 14 days. But again, like 7 of those 14 days had already passed. Other things we learned was, oh, okay, we understood at the time that they spent several days at one of the large employers in the community, like in business meetings. And about the middle of the next week was, no, they're in the industry, but that they didn't come here to do anything there. That's not where they were. And it was, oh, okay, that would have been really great information to have had that Friday. Right. Other times we get information, and you've heard me mention, like having information about directly from specific individuals is helpful. Things like, okay, thank you for letting us know that you've tested positive. Okay, and you said you were a contact of someone who tested positive last week. Were you quarantining during that period of time? Yes. Okay, if we get that yes, that tells us, again, the risk of exposing someone else during that week is very limited. But if they said, well, no, like I tested negative the day after I was told I was a contact, so I thought I was good to go, means that during that 6-7 days, they were potentially spreading that to other individuals. So there's this risk to that. So having that information helps us kind of go, okay, can we, in a sense, circle that case and go, not one that really worries us. Like some of the cases last week, we've got really good information that most likely contracted outside of the borough, returned into the borough, were quarantining, got the positive result, have continued to quarantine. And it's like, okay, that tells us as we look and review, we can probably say, well, let's remove those cases because they don't pose a risk of any sort of transmission. And so we really appreciate when people share that information, even if it's the information that, no, I wasn't quarantining, I was doing whatever. It helps us understand what that potential risk is. The other thing, and it's a big thing that we see from the conversations, it's a concern kind of like in terms of applying these, is the incredible concern about our collective behaviors in our congregate settings. Like when we come together, regardless of where we are we practicing that suite of mitigation effort? Are we keeping our distances? Are we wearing masks? Are we keeping our hands sanitized? Are we keeping our surfaces clean? Are we doing these multiple things? Yeah. Because the more we see that, we go, okay, even if someone wasn't like actively quarantining and came positive, or just showed up positive and they don't remember being a contact of anybody, the more broadly we adhere to those practices, it again lowers that concern of risk. Now, one of the aspects in terms of operating the school is with the mitigation efforts in place, those are very rigorous. And so while there's always the risk of spread, the more you practice those mitigation efforts, the less likely it is, though it can still happen. So that's kind of like just how the health advisory committee works, and the processes, the structures that we put together, the processes that we use, and then kind of the application and the things we've learned through our activities. Before I go on to some of the other questions and the answers, to give kind of that background, were there any other questions? Like, what are your other questions for me regarding that process that we use with the health level advisory committee? Okay. We also received a question asking, help us understand, like who would do contact tracing for us, both us meaning our local community, but also the school. So contact tracing is done by public health. And since the pandemic began, public health has hired hundreds of people and trained them to then be contact tracers, to basically make those calls, talk to the person who tested positive and say, so sorry. Try to help explain to them aspects of what does it mean to isolate now for the period of time? What does it mean for their close contacts to then quarantine for 14 days? How you can't test out of that 14-day period. That's still the recommendation and guidance. Let the virus, unfortunately, since we can't stop it, let it either develop, let it yourself cure it, give yourself that window to not be in a transmissible state. With kind of school-related cases, public health can tell us information about a student who tests positive. That's in the various aspects of HIPAA laws, even FERPA laws. There's communication allowed regarding communicable diseases that would allow public health to tell us that that student named Dan, well, actually, they wouldn't be able to say Dan, they'd be able to say, you have a student that's positive in your building. And they'd be telling Nurse Keith. Nurse Keith is also collecting and encouraging people to submit release forms, which would allow public health to give the information of Dan Polta was positive at the school. That information also then empowers Nurse Keith to then do the contact tracing related to Dan in the school and in the classrooms. And so again, our local health connection is going to be, in a sense, better situated to be working with the school to say, okay, who are the people in close contact? You know, do we have contact tracing logs for the classrooms? Who was present in class that day? Who happened to have been absent that day? Who are the people that need that information in terms of being the close contact? So having those release forms helps facilitate that. So like without that release form, or again, that kind of direct contact, if someone calls up and says, hey, Nurse Keith, yeah, it was me. And that has happened. And again, thank you to the people that have done that. We really appreciate that help. Without those release forms, then the contact tracing is only going to be done through public health. And I would also repeat that public health can only then reach out to the contacts from the information they were provided. If we don't remember and have that kind of that ongoing list of our contacts, they don't have someone to contact. They don't have anyone to call. And they do ask the positive individuals to say, can you reach out to the people you were with and let them know? And again, I'd say it's one of those polite things to do, to say, sorry, I didn't know. I didn't mean to put anyone at risk. I just want everyone to know that I'm sorry, and right now you are. What are your questions regarding contact tracing? I also take that break to move my cough drop to a different place, and I don't really have a cough. I just do that to kind of keep things flowing so I can keep speaking.
Dan,
Other question?
just one quick question from me, since there were no others. You mentioned just contact tracing in general, and that it seems to be taking about 2 weeks to kind of resolve source of some of these cases and things like that within the borough. Just at a higher level, would you attribute that to problems with adequate contact tracing in the state in general? Or, I mean, are there additional research? I ask, I guess, more for when I talk to people outside of the borough, people that could influence those resources.
I don't think those two conditions are related.
Okay.
Because contact tracers are going to, again, talk to somebody and gather information. And then I think other people then sit down and look at that information and try to connect the dots between, in a sense, answer that question. Where do we think you got this? Do we think it was caught and transmitted from outside of the state, travel related? Can we connect you to a previously positive individual? Secondary transmission, regardless of, again, same household, same workspace, same event. It's a known connection. So I think somebody else makes those connections, where the contact tracers are the people that really spend the time trying to call you, find out who are the people they need to call and advise, and then also try to do follow-up calls to say, how's your quarantining going? But again, if you don't answer the phone for an unknown number, you might not get it. I mean, screen our calls pretty well these days. Jenna?
Thank you, Dan. I think Jenna has a question.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, James. Dan, can we, those release forms, are they a condition of being in the building? Not required.
They're not a condition to attend school. Aspects of free and appropriate public education kind of prevents that being a mandatory thing. One of the aspects of the mitigation plans that we put together in for activities is that they are required for activities. Again, being that optional event, there are additional restrictions that can be placed upon student athletes, such as you have to get a physical, you have to maintain a certain GPA. But if you want to come to school, you don't need a physical, you don't need a GPA. And James, I realize I didn't answer maybe your core question about the resources in contact tracing. Earlier on, and I forget whether it's 2 months ago or so, but that's kind of the time frame in my mind. There was information in kind of public media aspects of limitations of contact tracing. I have not seen that repeated in the state of Alaska.
Good. Okay.
Which I'm just going to say I haven't seen that information.
Back to you, Jenna. Did you get your question answered?
Yes, I did. I was wondering whether we could require it or not, and it sounds like we can.
Okay. Anyone else?
I was going to say if the board wants me to spend money and get a legal opinion on that, I could, but I'm pretty confident with my understanding of those aspects of free and appropriate public education.
Could you give us is that a state statute that you're referring to?
More constitutional requirement.
U.S. Constitution.
Constitutional, other aspects of kind of like state. It's really embedded in overall law that individuals have a fundamental right to a free and appropriate public education. Regardless.
Okay. I guess I'm just wondering about, okay.
I mean, and again, just for example, regardless of things like what race you are, what gender you are, whether you have a learning disability, whether you have a physical disability, you have a legal right to that education, and it's the obligation of the society to provide that.
Even in times of a global pandemic. Yeah.
James, I don't think as chair you have to wait to be recognized. But you do have to unmute yourself.
I understand. I just want to make sure no one has a question before I chime in. Because my comment to that would be, I agree with you, Dan, and yet we can require vaccinations and things for children to be present in school buildings. So I do sometimes wonder where that line gets drawn. More of a comment than a question. So if no one has anything else on this topic, you can move on, Dan.
The next question was just asking, can you help us understand kind of the role of the borough testing program in relationship to kind of the role of the state? And the borough testing program, in a sense, is like a clinic that only does one thing. It only does COVID-19 testing. And as such, it's like any other testing center, whether that's a drive-through testing center or a clinic that also provides testing in addition to the other services that they do. The borough program exists under kind of standing medical orders of Dr. Dumas. This is the same doctor that also provides standing orders for, I think, most, if not all, of our local volunteer fire departments. In terms of like the distribution of those medications and to perform some of the medical procedures, you need kind of like the standing order of a doctor to provide those. And then they'll also do the review of that to confirm that it's being done appropriately. I think as most of us know, the borough uses swabs, like most of the other testing sites, and then sends those off to the state virology lab in Fairbanks, where they're then tested and run. The supplies that the borough gets do come directly from the state. I believe, again, we are paying the state for that. I don't think they're just gifting it to us. As much as the state likes us, they don't tend to give things away for free all the time. When positive results come out, that virology lab in Fairbanks, they don't do any of the calling. They send the information back to the provider who did the test. And then the provider who did the test is under the obligation to inform the individual that they tested positive. Hopefully they'll provide some guidance about, okay, you really need to start isolating. Are you symptomatic? How bad are you? You know, give some information, but again, they're not the specific contact tracers. So the provider tells the individual they're positive, and then the provider also reports it back to public health with the Department of Epidemiology. And the Department of Epidemiology then enters it into their collective database, kind of does a quick confirmation. Is this same name there already? Did Dan J. Polta test positive at one location, and this is a second test, which oftentimes is also part of like the information you provide while testing. They'll enter information into the database. When it gets entered into the database, that then kind of makes that information then available and pings out to the contact tracers. So the contact tracers then start working on their calls. So again, if those school cases, if it's direct, we can start moving on that quickly. If it's, think somebody went and got a test in Fairbanks, got a positive result, that person, that health provider in Fairbanks might not help kind of the direct connection, but go to public health and then over in the database and then back down. Because then at some point, public health will reach out and say, okay, hey, local community, you had a positive case. And when that connection is made, then especially with the school district, Nurse Keith and public health can go, okay, you just told me as this person at school, and they'll have a confidential conversation looking at the names and the names of people that we have the releases from to say, well, what degree of information can we have? Department of Epidemiology also has a process, again, just kind of doing deeper scrubs throughout the time and just kind of going, were there any duplicates? We kind of caught Dan J. Polta, but hey, this other guy, Daniel Polta, looks to be about the same guy. And so you will see, like on the daily updates on case numbers that DHSS sends out, that they'll say there'll be a correction. They'll be like, you know, one case was removed, 2 cases location changed because I got tested in Fairbanks, so they thought I lived in Fairbanks, and then they relocated it into Denali Borough and Healy. And you see those corrections, but they're pretty small. I think in this maybe week, last 4 or 5 days, I think I've seen 2 days with corrections, and there were days with over 200 cases reported, and there were 2 corrections on 2 different days. So information, especially this big picture information, is very reliable through the different processes used to identify that. There were some questions about, like, does public health come and like confirm the test? And it's like, I mean, technically that would mean that an official comes to then do a second test to confirm it. And again, regardless of the style of test being done, whether it's the nasal swab PCR test or the rapid test, the reliability of the positive results is extremely high, well above 99%. Meaning if you test positive, it, you know, if you're not, it's 1 in 1,000 or less that you are not positive. Where they both have slightly higher false negativity rates, with the rapid test having a far more significant false negative, meaning it would miss negatives, but both are incredibly reliable for positive results. At this point, entertain any questions regarding kind of like that aspect of the borough testing program, in my understanding.
Kristen?
So Dan, if I'm understanding you correctly, like if somebody goes in and gets a positive test and then 2 weeks later they go and get tested again because an employer might require that of them and they get another positive test, are they going to count them twice?
They would not count that individual twice. And if they did, it would be found and corrected quickly. So it wouldn't be like an additional cumulative case. And there's kind of 2 steps to that, or maybe 3 steps. When you get that second test, when you do the form, you kind of say, if you haven't done it, there's why, like kind of the why are you getting tested? And it's like, oh, I tested before, I'm getting checked. I was a close contact. I'm symptomatic with these symptoms, or I'm just doing basic screening. Like I'm worried. And so that's one way where they'd flag right away to say, okay, the person told us they tested positive already. So if this comes back positive, don't react like it's a new case. And then there's the immediate kind of database entry of all the information is exactly the same. That's going to ping very quickly through the kind of that review process. And then they also go through more slowly and go, Dan J. Polta, Daniel Polta. Wait a minute, it's this exact same name, but he listed 2 different addresses. And I go, yeah, oh, I forgot where I was. You know, they'll catch that. And so there are a couple steps early in the process to prevent kind of like the double reporting. And then another one kind of probably a couple days later then pulls out the few that do kind of sneak past those first couple. And we see that even in things of some of the unfortunate deaths that have happened, you know, where early in the pandemic in Alaska, very few cases. And there's like, how did we get a death assigned to us? We had that one poor individual from Petersburg, and now there's another one. And it's like, oh yeah, that person was actually like living in Washington for a year, but because they're formal residents, when it went through like state of Washington's process and Center for Disease Control's process, it got reassigned into Alaska. And we've had deaths that have occurred in the state of Alaska that have been reassigned out to states of their formal residents too.
Anyone else with questions for Dan on this one? Okay, Dan.
The other question was, you know, okay, so if my child who's a student or Bree, me, Liu, as a student tests positive, what should I kind of expect from the school? And so we talked a little bit about the aspect of how the contact tracing would work. Okay, hopefully everyone has those release forms in and you'd get a nice call from somebody you know, Nurse Keith, who'd talk with you about it, you know, give you that information, talk with you about who your contacts are, kind of try to help you keep everyone kind of in your bubbles safe and protected. If a student or staff member, really anybody, tests positive, the recommendations, like you know, it's almost like, yep, it's not a, like, again, a legally construed order. The medical recommendation is if you test positive, you must isolate yourself from other individuals for 10 days. Okay. Meaning isolate, even in your house, a different room from other family members. Isolation. Making sure that during this period of time that your body's fighting this infection, that again, you might not even feel a symptom for. While your body's fighting that off, you absolutely minimize the risk of transmitting it to anybody, even people in your own household. For the school contacts, again, assuming we've got that information and connection, then through Nurse Keith, we work and review all the information we have for school and different activities, whatever happened that day, and say, who are the close contacts? And the close contact is 6 feet or closer for total, in aggregate, 15 minutes. You know, 15 1-minute chunks of time is it. And we're not doing what a school district in Montana apparently is doing and holding 14-minute classes.
Oh, God.
Get under the wire.
That's cheating.
Yeah. So we'd identify those people. And if you're a close contact, again, because you might get a call saying, Dan, you're not positive, but you might have been in class with somebody who was. You're a close contact. Close contacts have that recommendation, super strong advisory, quarantine for 14 days. And that's stay home. It's not as strong in terms of like staying away from other family members, which has some inherent risk to it in terms of family members, but stay away from others for 14 days. And it's a little bit longer because it takes a couple days for that viral load to kind of build up. That's why someone who tests positive might be done in 10 days, where if you're a close contact, it's 14 days from the last contact. So again, if someone calls you 2 days after it, then you've got 12 days that you should be quarantining. And the most contagious period of time for somebody, and there are always the exceptions to all those things, seems to be 2 days prior to the onset of symptoms, and then 2 days after the onset of symptoms. That's when like there's just a lot of virus coming out. Where before that, there's not a whole lot of virus in your body. And like after that, again, I think what I saw kind of explained was like the virus is in a sense kind of started to move a bit deeper into you. You're either kind of diminishing it or it's getting in more deeply. That sometimes even people that are symptomatic with somewhat severe cases aren't shedding viruses to the degree of which much less severe people are, but are actually much sicker because of the location of the virus and the damage that it's doing in our bodies. And there's increasing evidence and research on the long-term damage that it's doing to cardiac and lung health, even in individuals of all ages who are asymptomatic or barely symptomatic with the disease. I think it was DHSS put together some good graphics on kind of this aspect of like the quarantine and isolation, because it can get kind of like, especially if you're thinking kind of in one household, can get kind of like a bit confusing. And if you'd like, I could share those with you, though I don't know if that's really sticking to the kind of topic of giving you the background information for looking at your definitions for health risk.
Unless a board member particularly wants to drill into that, Dan, it's probably a level deeper than we need to get into this evening.
Okay.
Were there any other questions that were posed to you?
Those were the questions I received.
Any other general high-level questions for Dan about this entire process before we get into the actual motion? All right, then. Well, thank you for that background, Dan. And I think we'll discuss the motion at hand now. Questions or comment? Nikki.
Yeah, thanks, James. Tonight, I would really like to propose an amendment to this amendment to include extracurricular activities as part of the Smart Start framework. In particular, on page 2 in our Smart Start framework, adding to the operating framework and low risk, extracurricular practices and events shall be allowed with appropriate mitigation efforts. And I will email these. Also in medium risk, to add extracurricular practices and events shall be allowed with appropriate mitigation efforts in place. And to high risk, add extracurricular practices shall not be allowed. And then I'd like to speak to that once we've moved further in.
Jenna?
Second.
Thank you. So would a fair assumption of that amendment, Nikki, just to kind of frame it, be that activities would move in lockstep with the decision process around risk levels and in presence in the building for instruction?
Exactly. I feel like we have, as a board, haven't really discussed this as a board, and just bringing it to the table tonight allows this discussion, and it doesn't have to be tonight. We can talk about tabling, but I feel that it brings congruency between in-person learning and extracurricular activities and doesn't speak to the importance of one over the other. And it's not saying that extracurricular activities are not important at all. I just feel like it's something that we need to discuss as a board. And I think we've been asked by the public to address this, and we haven't officially yet either. So this brings it up to the table to say, do we as a board want to make this as part of the framework, or do we want it to be a separate administrative decision? And it also maybe perhaps brings to question if we feel like extracurricular activities can be done in person, why not in-person learning in levels of red? And so that just kind of opens that, but I'm also probably going to move to table so we have a chance to digest, much the same as we have the amendments proposed by Jenna tonight.
I agree, Nikki. I think it's definitely a discussion we need to have, and if we were to move forward, I think postponing till the next meeting would be appropriate so that we can get adequate public comment. Ryan?
I would just like to add that I like Nikki's usage of extracurricular activities. I feel we haven't paid all the attention to the band and the music and the robotics class, or coding, or whatever it is. That is your extracurricular activity that all students have some outlet somewhere. So I applaud her on the use of that.
Let me just make sure no one else first, Jenna.
Yeah.
Krista?
Can I just speak to the framework itself instead of the amendment that we are speaking of right now?
Yes.
Okay. My quick question was, I thought that these bullet points that were added were things that we talked about in our August meeting, and that we didn't put in. I guess maybe I'm not sure if I'm reading this right, but I thought these were things that we talked about and didn't put in August.
Go ahead, Nan.
I could speak a little bit of the kind of history of the framework, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at, but whether something was discussed and then not included, I'd have to go back and maybe listen to recordings of meetings on some of those aspects. But you initially adopted the framework in July, on July 16th in your regular meeting. You then looked at it again with additional information, such as information on Health Level Advisory Committee, in a special meeting on July 30th. We did some revision on August 20th to the structure, and that was in regular meeting. And then you did some updates at your last meeting on October 15th. And that's kind of like the history of when you saw that, approved it, and then the times that you've seen it in board meetings.
Did that answer your question, Jen or Trista?
It helps.
Okay. Anyone else? Especially to the amendment proposed? Go ahead then, Jen.
Thanks. Oh,
Did
sorry,
you have something, Kristen? I'm
I
sorry.
saw Kristen's hand up. Kristen, you can go ahead if you'd like.
In speaking specifically to the amendment, I would definitely agree with tabling it. I feel like we would do the public a disservice by not allowing for some public comment and a public reflection time, I guess.
Go ahead, Jenna.
Just a point of clarification. Thanks, James. And a question to Nikki. Was your amendment to the amended language of October 21 or of the October 15 language?
Specifically, it's an amendment because we're already working on an amendment. So it's not instead of the original amendment, it's in addition to. And so wherever we end up putting that is fine. I just feel like it needs to be addressed.
Great.
So just to clarify, it's an amendment to the proposed amendment on the 21st of October.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I appreciate the congruency of activities and in-person learning that including activities in this framework would provide. I do worry about tabling it just because I think the community is clamoring for clear direction. And if that, so I would prefer that to be as timely as possible. Especially since the guidance from the district or how the district has chosen to conduct activities under red recently changed, and for it to change again would lead to some confusion. So I would suggest not tabling it, but addressing it tonight.
Can you speak, Dan, to what the operational model for activities would look like in the interim between now and a meeting that we may or may not approve something?
I would continue with the plans as I shared with the board, which would be to allow student activities to continue, that we would continue practicing with rigorous mitigation efforts, that I would continue to look at and review our ability to invite participants for competitive events, or our ability to travel to those competitive events. And I might suggest to the board, you seem to have really shifted your conversation from what seemed to have been your intended conversation, which was to really look at and focus on definition of risk levels, and in a sense, one that you've very mentally prepared for. You've seen language, you've considered language on that. We've had opportunity again for the opportunity for public input on that, and that's been in front of you. You may have received input from constituents on other matters, which are now in front of the board through amendment offered by Nikki. And I'd recommend that you, if possible, can we separate those two conversations? Because right now what I'm seeing is we're jumping to a new conversation instead of continuing a conversation that was started at the last board meeting and was tabled for the intention to give you time to think, give you time to process, and to hear if there are additional comments from the community on those matters.
I concur, Dan, and I think we need to obviously vote on the proposed amended motion, but it may do us more service to move back to the original amendment and then take this up as its own self-contained amendment at a later date. Other comments from the board? Yes, Brianna.
I was just curious if the board has been able to look at our mitigations that we follow when we're in the red. Like, we just signed a waiver yesterday when we started practice, and parents were required to sign it as well. And I was just wondering if the board has been able to see the really strict mitigation that we follow so that we can make it safe.
I can say that I know personally some of them, but certainly not every nuance. Maybe some of the parents with students in the building know more directly about that, but yes, Dan.
And again, delaying that conversation would allow me to prepare those documents for the entire board to see.
Thank you.
And I'd also stress again, placing a decision at a board level because of the community importance, making that a governance decision of the board does change the impact of the comments and the direction of the comments. In terms of where those comments and input should go and where they should be received is different depending on the level of decision. And if you want to have a conversation of where that decision should lie, is it that top level governance decision? Or is even the phrasing of that still an administrative decision? Considering that location is one to consider wisely, and one that is something that you would want to ask for that broad community input on. And at this point, you have not asked for that. And so again, whether the question of can you have the separate conversation of looking at the definitions of risk level, or do you feel that these are now too intertwined to have one and then the other as you're prepared to? Or do you need to postpone have a discussion and postpone the full consideration?
I saw your hand, Nikki, but just let me make sure nobody else has a question first. Go ahead, Nikki.
To make things easier, I can remove my motion until we've had a chance to vote on the one in front of us, and then remake it at the end if you'd like to consider later. Not quite sure how to do that, but
I think technically you can't withdraw it. We would have a few options.
since it's already seconded.
Yeah, I believe we could vote and vote it down. We could have a motion to table the amended motion
Yes.
or postpone to a later date. Dan is nodding his head.
Postpone is the proper parliamentary procedure.
Yes, thank you.
Move something from one meeting to another meeting.
Yes.
Tabling it is like what you do in the middle of a meeting to kind of drop it and do something else. It is used in sneaky ways to make something disappear.
Agree.
If you want to talk,
And we're not trying to do that. So.
Which also means if you want to talk about it again, don't vote it down, because a measure that has been defeated should not be reconsidered by the board.
Mhm.
The board has made a decision and you must move on as a body, with a procedure to consider reconsiderations that we could get into through parliamentary procedure if need be.
Well, I move to postpone the amendment to a, I don't know if we want to do a special board meeting or postpone it till the next November board meeting to allow time for input from the public.
Can we
I'll
do
second
it? We can do a later date to be determined.
Sounds pretty open-ended.
Yeah, I would like a sense of how urgently and quickly people would like to move, and if we are up for another special meeting.
I guess my question is for Dan, if that's all right, Jim.
Go ahead, Brian.
So are all the extracurricular activities practicing now, or is it only volleyball?
Right now, we've been able to bring volleyball back and starting to work on others.
Okay, so we don't know how this is overall working yet.
I believe we've had one day practice in the gym yesterday.
One practice.
Okay, so yes, 2 days in the gym practice with volleyball.
Okay, but band hasn't been playing in band, and choir hasn't been meeting for choir, or any of those other ones, correct?
Correct. Nor do I believe that middle school basketball has resumed yet, or like after school clubs in really any structures.
That was my only question. Thank you.
Kristen?
While I have not seen all of the mitigation efforts, I know that they have been working very, very, very hard to draft a lot of documents to try and allow some sort of an understanding for extracurricular activities that the administration, the AD, Dan Polta, I mean, all these people have been working really, really hard on this decision and on these documents because it has been an administrative decision that I would hate to cheapen their work. I'm not sure that's the right word, or to dismiss the great amount of work that they have done with DHSS and with different organizations to try and get something together to try and move forward with this, that leaving it as an administrative decision so that they can assess and see how it is going to work, I feel like for me would be a prudent decision, just because I know of the work that they have done, that they have spent, their time, their resources that they're using to try and find a way to make some allowances for different opportunities for all activities. And just like we've done with anything, you start small and you try and add line upon line, a little bit at a time, to see if it's working or if it's not working, and reevaluating and trying to move forward, or saying, no, pull back, we can't do that, try and do this. And I feel like on an administrative level, they're able to maybe act a little bit faster instead of it being a big board decision. So they can quickly assess and change things as needed as things arise. We are living in a time of great change and great constantly moving targets, that perhaps leaving it as an administrative decision that allows them to do the work we have entrusted them to do and that we have hired them to do for us and within each school situation.
Anyone else? All right, we didn't set a specific date, but the vote would be on the motion to postpone to a date to be determined. The amended motion. Yes, Dan?
I might at this point simply suggest the next board meeting.
By default, that's what's
Later,
going to happen.
That's the phrase, it would be the next board meeting.
I guess, does she need a second, James,
I thought we had a second, did we not?
to postpone it?
I think Jenna seconded it, but we could be specific. If you'll just state your motion specifically with a date, Nikki.
Okay, I move to postpone the amendment to the amendment to the next board meeting in November.
Second.
All right, Connie, a roll call vote, please.
Brianna Mayo,
Yes.
Kristen Randall,
Yes.
Jenna Ham,
Yes.
Trista Davis,
Yes.
Michelle Nelson,
Yes.
Nikki Demers,
Yes.
Ryan Jusak,
Yes.
Don Adams,
Yes.
James Kench.
Yes, motion passes unanimously. Back to the original amendment. Is there any discussion on this language or questions?
I had some questions that I hope are just like yes, no questions that I went through. So, what are considered the connecting communities when you list that in the document? I guess that's not a yes, no question, but hopefully it's a pass question.
Since Jenna proposed the amendment, I'm gonna have her address that, I guess, since the language was originally from her.
There's language from the original criteria that refers to transmission rates and connecting communities. I don't think that has changed from the previous version to this
So
one,
I
but
guess the question is that, I mean, Anderson, Cantwell, Nenana, or
no, the
Dan,
communities of
Dan, can you speak to how you would evaluate connecting communities?
Right, so that was the amendment that you passed to the document in your August meeting. And the conversation there was looking at, in a sense, what's happening in Fairbanks, what's happening in Matson and Anchorage, places where a lot of people in our borough go and spend significant time on in the weekends, whether shopping or spending a lot of time socially up there or down there in different locations. And so there's a feeling at the time of that discussion that knowing what the transmission risks were there during those experiences that many of us have should in some way be used to consider what is our risk level locally. So if you wanted a more clarifying comment from that, the language would be to amend it throughout saying rather than connecting communities to identify those communities.
no, not necessarily. I just was looking for some clarification there. Have we taken into consideration the comments from the survey? There was a lot of comments that were related, I feel like, to this risk level thing. Have we listened to the people that have elected us to do this?
Kristen, if you could just hold that question 1 minute. I just want to make sure we go around the table here first. But thank you, it's a good question. Anyone else first? Yes, Dawn.
It appears to me as that language exists in what is currently in an approved Smart Start framework. It's just been elaborated, so maybe slightly expanded on, but and included in each one of the risks levels. So it's not really new language, the idea of considering communities, connected communities. So.
And I apologize, Jenna. I didn't realize that with that language, and probably should have just asked Dan first for his interpretation of that. But
I also drafted some of the initial recommendations.
right. Unless there's another question, we'll move to Kristen's again. Do you remember the question, Dan, or do you need her to restate it?
I would need to restate it, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Have we taken into consideration, we ask for these surveys and we ask for people to respond, and I'm just asking, have we taken into account what people responded to in their surveys into the risk levels. I feel like there were a lot of survey responses regarding that. I'm just wondering if we made sure we had made that a consideration.
So when you initially phrased it, you referenced your question more to the board, and I was like, all right, well, not asking me.
Just ask Dan. I'm not sure exactly who. I know it was between you and Jenna that worked on this document. So I just
no, most of the language work I did based on kind of those questions coming from surveys, which I was seeing as I want to know how this risk level is decided. I thought it was one thing, and it turned out it was something else. And I even would go back to the document and go like, no, I think we're doing what the board provided. And so was trying to say, well, how can we provide more clear information both to the committee, but then also so that we can use to communicate out to people. We see these things, and that's how it fits into the criteria. And so tried to do that, to try to add a bit more clarity, because some people were saying, again, raising the question of community transmission. So you see the recommendation to change to confirmed transmission rather than the formal definition with community. So there's still going to be kind of some vagueness in there. Try to be really clear, look like kind of within each thing, like what are we trying to look at to come up with that overarching determination. Other things that I did that you might have noticed in the letter that we sent on Friday regarding the health risk level was some different information formatting in that letter to the community, and tried to identify what were the things we saw, case numbers, basic information, and how did that apply into the criteria and the framework. And try to say like that letter should probably communicate those basic points of information in a relationship to the established framework, so that each letter also reinforces, well, this is why. And try to kind of telegraph out, I'd say better, what's our likely ongoing condition? Because another one of the big concerns that we've heard repeatedly is the uncertainty, the dread of a late Friday email. You know, not wanting to receive, in a sense, that information at all, and wanting to know where are we going to be for a period of time. And so tried to, I think, in the letter indicate, you know, I think this time was like, hey, a bunch of cases fell out of the 14-day window. We've got a couple more cases. Here's our window. Next Friday, a couple more cases fall off of that window. We have a different set of 14 days to look at. So that was another thing that we did administratively to try to adjust, kind of like in terms of looking at that survey, to try to provide that clarity. When I looked back at the aspects and recommended changes to improve that clarity, I ended up with still questions that I go, I still, even in terms of applying this, like I still want clarity on some of these points. Like with those different relationships of no confirmed cases, 14 days, case count transmission, the transmission rates in other communities, healthcare contact tracing. It's like, well, what's our priority? Are these conditions all have to be met? Some of them? Is it a general matrix that we're going to have to look at and interpret? But we want to make sure we're looking at these things. Like guidance about that, like how to apply that with multiple statements can be quite important. Because when we left 2 statements in the earlier versions for high risk, some of us focused and were really kind of able to grasp and hold on to one definition of high risk, though the second definition was always present. And that surprised a lot of people. They didn't remember that, they didn't recall that, it hadn't been communicated clearly enough that they understood that that was a possibility. So I think so. You'd have to ask yourself, do you feel that it does? I would continue to ask that question I am asking for guidance from the board, even with what I see as additional clarity. What is the relationship between those points?
I see you, Jenna. Just hang on 1 second. No one else? Go ahead, Jenna.
The 21 October revision of the criteria. My edits that I submitted to Dan at the end after our board meeting had done one thing that's not reflected here, and that is, and this relates to Dan's quandary over how to prioritize these different criteria that fall under each category of risk. I had my suggestion was to not suggest any level of priority among those bullets, to provide more discretion in the decision making. And that would be to unbold that bold statement, which identifies the transmission rate in the borough. Whereas, so as it currently is laid out, it looks to a viewer that, you know, that's the priority statement among in that, because it's not part of the bulleted list. I think given how, you know, how much information that health level advisory committee gets or doesn't get, I think, or that some members have and others don't, it's important to make these criteria not rigid. So I would suggest not including any priority. Does that make sense to other board members? And this is I would say this is our directive to the administration.
It makes sense.
This needs to be ours. Our guidance.
That makes sense, Jenna. Thank you. Other comments or questions? And Dan, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kristen. Or wait, Nikki, I'm sorry. I think Nikki had a hand up too.
Kristen was first.
That's okay. I just want to make sure you get a chance to speak, Nikki.
Nikki, you should go first. Thank you.
I guess the only comment I have is I agree with all of these additions. And then just to say too, that just recognizing the administration's work and pulling this together in cooperation with the board members who submit input. And hopefully, you know, those are formulated based on, you know, public input as well. That ultimately, as Dan said when he was talking about how the committee decides, or how the decision ultimately resides with the administration after the committee convenes. Just to reiterate, the administration's input and final say based within these parameters that we set forth as a board. And so recognizing the hard work that goes into that, and not ever saying that as a board, we are making that decision for him. We're just saying, this is how we want the decision to be made and the things we want considered in the decision. And so never saying, you know, whether we decide to input anything else in these risk levels to be decided later never negates the work being done by the administration for the board.
Thank you, Nikki. Go ahead, Kristen.
Yes, this is like speaking to what Jenna has said. I mean, I think that I think it's good to leave it a little bit more fluid, like she said, because I mean, this whole situation is a fluid situation from day to day. So thinking about each of these different risk levels, do you feel like because of how it's laid out, Dan and Jenna, do you feel like it gives more of an opportunity to return quicker to in-person learning, or do you feel like it makes it harder to return to in-person learning based on the criteria that are listed? As vague as they are, or not as vague, that's not the right word, but as fluid as we are kind of leaving it.
Go ahead, Dan.
I don't know that the criteria makes returning in-person learning easier or harder. I'd say what makes returning in-person learning an event that might happen sooner rather than later is the pattern of transmission locally and across the state, which I'm sorry is unfortunately related to collective behaviors that we make in communal spaces. You know, and again, I say that because CDC is saying nationwide, what they're seeing is a lot of transmission at fairly small events in homes, of kind of like our social bubbles, and we feel comfortable with 10 people and we're close together for long periods of time without masks, and someone unfortunately didn't know they were infected. That's why I'm saying that, you know, in our kind of those congregate spaces, it doesn't matter what the space is, it's happening. That's what makes it hard to come back to in-person learning. The criteria, whether they're kind of the broad descriptors like you have, or considering, or if they're solid case numbers, I don't think that's what makes it easier or hard. What makes it hard is the reality of transmission that we're experiencing. I think what I encourage you to do and strive for is to provide enough clarity that you feel comfortable saying, like, I understand the direction I'm giving. I could provide feedback to the administration if the direction seems to be going a different way from what I understood it to be. And that it's clear enough that you felt that most people would be able to also interpret, hey, if they see kind of those things, they would likely say, yeah, we are also at that high risk. And that might be a harder thing when I think we have different risk tolerances. There are some of us that are incredibly risk averse, and some of us that are willing to accept far more risk. And so coming with guidance for all of us and a collective decision for our schools is what makes it so challenging, because we have people that say, I want to be in the building and I'm incredibly risk averse. I want to teach the kids, but I'm incredibly risk averse. And we also have people that say, I want my child in the building and I'm willing to accept a lot of risk to do that. The biggest thing, and I think the assistance that everyone has said, is I would like clarity as much as possible on that decision. And the challenge is you can set a number and you're going to lock into a number. You can set a criteria, but that leaves the decision open for those aspects of appreciation or frustration based on individual risk tolerances. And it allows some of that to come into even our decision process, as you heard me share earlier.
Thank you.
Oh, follow up?
Yes.
Follow up comment. If you looked and seen the recommendation from the Center for Disease Controls on operating schools or opening schools, this is their criteria. They identify 8 different things, it's a couple pages long, that they say a school district should look at. 8 different things, and consider 5 different levels for 8 of those things. And once you do that, make your local decision. And the items are the same. It's what are the case transmissions? What are the test positivity rate? What is your planned for and adherence to mitigation? What are health capacities in your system. It's those same types of things that we're looking at.
So Dan, let me ask you, because I think what I've heard you say, especially in this amended Smart Start, is that if it were to pass like this, you still need a lot more further clarification from the board about how you're supposed to consider these multiple factors, and does one criteria trump another, and how do you go through the decision tree? Am I hearing that, or?
Which is challenging with any matrix. The CDC does say these 3 are major things to think about, and these 5 are lesser things to think about. That's as most priority ranking they give anything. I appreciated Jenna's suggestion that could be wrapped into amendment to remove the bold from the statement and include that as one of the standing bullet points. I don't know, so I see that. I heard her say that she feels that the intent is to look at those like a matrix, that neither one is a trigger, nor will any one be fully ignored. I would say that makes sense. I would say personally, I'd go, I would lean probably towards always putting a lot more weight personally on the local experience. What is our local transmission experience? Because even if Fairbanks and Anchorage were like low and something just was crazy here, like we should take action. We shouldn't go like, oh, it's fine in Fairbanks, we're okay. Where I think we'd be more able to go, it's not so good in Fairbanks, but we're sort of okay here because we're a little worried about our connections, but nothing's happening here yet.
Other questions or comment from board members? Yes, Ryan.
I just want to, I guess, read this from your, what we're voting on today. High risk red, Anderson, Tri-Valley, and Cantwell. So all of our brick and mortar schools. Students will be taught via distance learning. An extremely limited number of students needing intensive learning support services will be considered on a case-by-case basis for restricted in-person instruction. Due to the high risk of virus transmission, no in-person instruction is guaranteed. We are a school. If our students aren't able to be in the school being educated, then I have a problem with stuff connected to this. So that is just my comments on here.
Anyone else? Is there any interest in yes, Jenna?
I was just going to move to amend.
That's what I was just going to ask, if you so choose. So.
I move to amend the amended CBSD Smart Start reopening framework of 21 October to include as a bullet point instead of bold text the first line under each risk category.
I think that's clear. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kristen. Any additional discussion on that, or can we do a roll call vote on the minor amendment of the, or maybe not so minor, but the changing of that formatting? All right, Connie, a roll call vote on the amended amendment, please. All in favor of it?
Brianna Mayo,
Yes.
Jenna Ham,
Yes.
Don Adams,
Yes.
Nikki Demers,
Yes.
Ryan Jusak, Brian?
Yes.
Trista Davis?
No,
No? Did you say no, Trista?
I said no.
Okay. Michelle Nelson?
Yes.
Kristen Randall?
Yes.
James Tench?
Yes, motion passes 7-1, I believe. Back to the original amendment as amended now. Any additional discussion or questions on this? Jenna?
I guess I would just, we could consider under that underlined and bold bit there, criteria for health conditions, a statement that would reflect what, how Dan was summarizing the consideration of those bullets as a matrix. I don't know that that's necessary, but
I guess the reason would be is if we feel as a board, there might be some confusion again in the community about how the implementation of this works.
I think it's clearer now than it was. So I think it's an improvement.
I think it wouldn't hurt for us to kind of revisit and restate the evaluation process now and then briefly in each meeting, maybe for a while too, just so that those in attendance do get to hear that message a little bit more often. Not at length, but certainly just keep the awareness level up of how the decisions are being made. Yes.
I just think Dan does a good job in outlining some of that, as he alluded to in the communications that he sends out to families.
I agree.
I made a point of really starting on Friday, and that was based on a lot of input on the uncertainty that people had on what constitute, how risk levels were determined, and information on duration. And that in and out uncertainty is really rough. We talked about it in the summer as we were moving into this. But when we're in the building, the uncertainty is kind of fine because it rolls on, we're in the building. It's when we want to get back in the building, we keep looking for it, we keep hoping, and we just keep getting beaten down. And it's hard to remember, but that means we can get back in the building. Rather than telegraphing out, hey, we're going to be home through the first semester. Make that statement. A lot of certainty. If you did want to recommend any like kind of aspect of consideration, language might be the identifying conditions for each health risk shall all be considered. And then I would also say with a priority placed on confirmed transmission in the borough.
Just at the beginning of the document, Dan, or?
Right. So someone could move to insert after the heading criteria for health conditions, the conditions identified for each risk level shall all be considered with a priority placed on confirmed transmission in the borough.
I think it's a good idea if someone would like to make that motion.
I wish I had the words in front of my face.
You could default to the
Repeat that.
Can
Sorry,
we motion to
I almost scribed that quickly enough, but could you repeat one more time, Dan? I could make
try?
Got it.
The phrasing
Oh,
could,
oh, Nikki has it.
She says she has it.
Got
Excellent.
You ready?
Yes.
I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment. We read after, on page 1, under criteria for health conditions, to include the conditions identified for each risk level shall be considered with priority placed on confirmed transmission within the borough.
Second.
that had the word all in there? Shall all be considered? Thank you. Just clarifying.
You're good, Nikki. All right, any discussion on that, or can we do a quick roll call? All right, Connie, go ahead. Oh, Ryan?
So are we voting on the amendment to the amendment to the amendment, or? I mean,
The original amendment was postponed, the one that Nikki made. We're voting on the amended amendment as just amended by Nikki with this additional language at the top. Does that make sense?
it makes sense, but.
So
this
we're
doesn't
not
make
voting
sense.
to approve, we're not voting to approve the main amendment that we came here to talk about. We're only voting to amend that amendment before we have a final vote on the amendment.
But doesn't Jenna have an amendment on the table right now to make the bold?
That we approved, didn't we?
Approves that one.
So we're back to that amendment. So I guess it is the amended amendment. Sorry. Thank you. Yes, Dan.
You're considering the amendment to the amendment, which is to include the language that Nikki read out on the conditions for the identified conditions for each risk level shall all be considered with a priority placed on confirmed transmission in the borough. If that passes or when that passes or fails, you'll then go back to the main motion, which is the updated blue language that was presented in board docs.
Does that clarify, Ryan?
I guess so. It's not the final vote on the whole thing yet.
Correct. That is correct.
It's just the changes that Jenna wants.
Just the additional, well, and this is, yeah, the language that Nikki just added.
Or Nikki wanted, yeah. Or Dan. Yeah. Yes.
It's not personal. It's just an amendment. So, all right. There's nothing else. Connie, could you do a roll call vote, please, on the amended amendment?
Brianna Mayo,
Yes.
Brian Jusak,
Yes.
Don Adams,
Yes.
Nikki Demers,
Yes.
Michelle Nelson,
Yes.
Trista Davis,
Yes.
Jenna Ham,
Yes.
Kristen Randall,
Yes.
James Tench.
Yes, motion passes unanimously. Now back to the main motion. Is there any additional discussion on this before we take a vote? Is it clear what we're voting on? Yes, Dan.
Just to summarize for everyone here and in the audience, the motion in front of you is to consider, again, the changes that have been now slightly amended as presented and located in board docs, moving 2 paragraphs, which you approved on October 15th to another location, and then including kind of language clarifying definitions of each of the risk levels. Those are the changes that are being considered right now. You have another proposal that you have already decided to postpone, and that proposal would be having a board discussion to decide whether or not to include the activities in the basic governance structure in this document as well. That is a later, you've already decided to postpone that one. Right now, you're looking at those criteria for the health conditions.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions before the final vote? All right, then, Connie, a roll call, please.
Brianna Mayo,
Yes.
Trista Davis,
Yes.
Jenna Ham,
Yes.
Dawn Adams,
Yes.
Nikki Demers,
Yes.
Ryan Jusak,
Yes.
Kristen Randall,
Yes.
Michelle Nelson,
Yes.
James Tench.
Yes, motion passes unanimously. Moving on, we did have a piece of correspondence that now shows under public comment for non-agenda items. Did we have anyone sign up or show up for comment?
No.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Dawn, yes.
Can I just ask how many members of the public joined us today?
It
I
looks
saw
like
a high total of 30.
Hmm.
But it stayed pretty regular at 27 and 28.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to our comments from the board. Nikki, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thanks everybody for watching tonight. Hopefully we brought some clarification to process. And I know it was good for me. I hope it was good for everyone else as well. I appreciate Dan and your patience with us, and for everyone else too, and your consideration, and hope you all have an awesome week. Enjoy the snow. Sorry, Kristen.
I'm not sure if I'm ready to go yet, but I've had a lot of communications this week, and some are, professional related, and some are other related, personal related, and I would really encourage every member of the board to possibly reach out to different constituents that they may not always consider part of maybe their sphere of influence or sphere of contact. I've had a lot of communications with parents who are struggling I woke up crying this morning just thinking about it, but talking to the second grade mother who has 2 younger kids at home who can't do it. Talking to the father that gets 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night after their night shift to try and educate their children. To the parents of the first graders or the kindergartners who lost 2 months of school last year and are struggling to read and struggling to keep up with their kids' education, where they are not equipped to do that. Talking with the senior parents and their kids having a struggle trying to find motivation to finish, to try and find motivation to keep going. I have had so many conversations that just bring me to tears talking to these parents that are truly struggling and need to be in that building, learning and growing. And some of them are to a breaking point. And I worry that as a school board member that I might not be doing enough to try and get those kids educated and to keep them here and to keep them learning. And I'm sorry I'm emotional about it, but I worry. It keeps me up at night, and I'm not sure what I can do as a school board member, but as long as I'm here, I will continue to fight for them to get into school so that they can continue learning. So sorry, but it really hurts. And I hope that we are doing the best every day for these children to get them into that building to learn. So thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kristen. I'd like to say thank you to Dan and everybody that is trying to implement all this stuff. It's so hard and it's so changing every day. And I feel the pressure too as a board member. I have people talking to me, and it's hard to explain that we don't make all the calls and we don't really have the final say, and we're just going off of all these guidelines. And I am fighting for all the kids in our school. I mean, if no kids in school, we're not doing our job good enough, or we need more resources. So I think we have a great board and a great administration to work through all this with. And I keep looking forward to working with them to get the solutions and get our kids back in classes and doing sports at the levels that we can safely do it. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, all the staff that are trying to keep this going. Thank you very much. And I think I'll go to Jenna.
Thanks, Ryan. I would like to give a shout out to all of the teaching staff in the district. Parent-teacher conferences seemed to go very smoothly, and I hope they had maybe the teachers had more conferences, because it's a little easier to press a button on your computer than drive all the way in. Anyway, I would like to give a shout out to the teachers and staff for pulling off the job of educating the district students with grace, with compassion, and a commitment to learning. It shows. And Michelle, good evening.
Oh, thank you, Jenna. I want to thank Dan and the administration for everything, because I know this is a lot of work and a lot of stress. And the situation is not ideal for anyone. And I hope that everyone knows that we are trying to do our best to keep the best interest for all students. And it's not easy. But it's never intended, or that people should think that it's not fair for just certain areas or whatever, because it is one of the hardest positions I've ever held. And I was warned that you can't, it's not gonna be easy, and you can't make everyone happy, but we're trying. And I'm thankful that, in my position, and I feel for Kristen and how she spoke to all the different parents of different situations, and that, you know, I am very thankful that, and my job, I'm able to do what we're doing. You know, one of us is home with our kids, and it's not just on one person because it's very stressful. But the teachers out there, thank you for sticking with us and just being there for our kids, because that is our number one goal here. So thank you to everyone and have a good evening. Nikki.
I could go again, but I'll pass it on to Brianna.
Sorry, Trista.
Trista.
Good evening. Okay, so thank you everyone for taking the time to be here. This is very stressful stuff, but I have to say thank you to the administration, the district office, everything that they do like every day. And I really do appreciate all the teachers done to make at-home learning a little smoother. But I will say it, and I will say it every time. I can't wait for them to be back in school. And I look forward to that time. So, James.
I too would like to give a big thank you, Dan, to you, administration, teachers, all the staff again, just for the continued work on all of this. And also, I'd like to maybe just offer a comment through you, Brianna, to kind of pass on to all the students that I appreciate maybe the grace and understanding you're giving your own administration a little bit, and hopefully acknowledge that we are trying. We absolutely get that the most valuable experience would be to have you back in the building. But we're wading our way through this too. So we appreciate the patience you extend us. Who's left?
Dawn.
Thank you. Dawn.
Thank you, board. Thank you to the administration, and thank you to the community that has participated more in the last 6 months, 9 months maybe, than my first 3 years on the board. So it's and it's going to take a community, and it's going to take parents making decisions and community making a decision about what they do when they get COVID and who they tell, and that knowing that it helps us. I appreciate Dan's description of sort of the different paths that information takes and how it can be very useful. And Bree, thanks.
Thank you, Dawn. I would definitely just, like everybody said, a big thank you to our administration. I've been back and forth emailing with Mr. Polta a ton recently, so I appreciate that quick communication, and same with Mr. Pitt. But overall, just, I know like kids can be difficult, and we want what we want and we expect it, but we know that all of you guys are looking out for us, and we appreciate that you've taken the time, like the last meeting that was, I think, 4.5 or 5 hours long. We appreciate that time that you put into making those changes for our sake and really looking out for our best interest. So yeah. Mr. Polta.
Thank you. Nurturing and empowering and inspiring today's student to positively shape tomorrow's world. It's kind of missing Vern to me, because he always, would really just appreciate even just like seeing breather, seeing a student participate in this. And when Isaiah popped into the window for a little bit, and every time each of your kids kind of like sneaks in to give you something is something like we don't get again, like when we're meeting in person. But it's a great, just easy reminder of why we're here. And it's looking at how do we help guide that individual to become that adult, that will contribute positively to the world. And I even looking at just even those of us on Zoom, and I can go, okay, so Brianna's student now, and I can go, okay, so Michelle, I knew as student then. And I go, see, I know it happens. I know people grow up. Um, I know, like, not only, Michelle, were positive things happening back then, but they're happening now too. And I see that, and I know that's going to continue even in challenging times. And this is an incredibly challenging times. And I really appreciate the work that you've done and your ability to stick with some really tough processes in looking at what are some really hard decisions for the community that you're elected to represent. Because you could say, no, administration, figure it out. It's like, and trust me, people be happy and upset with us regardless of what happens. You can make whatever decision you want. It's still gonna come down on our shoulders. So it's not protecting us from anything, leaving us to make the decision or to give us more formal guidance on anything. Everyone that works for the school district still has that instruction to implement that. That's kind of a burden that comes with the role that we have. But the commitment to the process, I think, is so critical at these times of challenge, because I think it's through that process that has that conversation about what is that shared understanding of the situation that we have that helps us go, we know how to answer the questions. And maybe not everyone's satisfied with the answer, but the process that we use in this society helps us get to that answer. And more than anything, it gives us the respect for the process. And we're looking at things, what should the definition of our community risk level be? Should activities be a governance decision or administrative decision? Okay. And we're also engaged as a society in far bigger conversations about things in terms of like our overarching kind of big picture directions. We have processes that help us with that. And I really appreciate the conversation that you've been able to have where you're able to share those ideas, hear each other, listen to each other, not always agree with each other. Because we see in other aspects of our society where the ideas are not being shared, and so the disagreements grow, codify and entrench more and more, rather than coming to a point of, yeah, we have significant disagreements, and I'm not going to agree with you on them, but I understand where you're coming from. And I appreciate your ability on these matters to come together because you're able to focus on what you know is truly critical and important. Today's student. Today's student that's in kindergarten, today's student that's in 5th grade, today's student that's in 9th grade, today's student that's a senior. You're able to keep that as a focus of your conversation. I really appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And seeing as there is no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, James. Good night.
James and Trista, I do have a few things to sign. So I have a contract and minutes and things. So whenever you have time to stop by, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll try to remember to do it